Grace and peace to you, brothers and sisters, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Amen. So, who watched the Super Bowl last Sunday? Okay, a good number of you, not everybody. I usually don't watch anymore. I didn't really care about the teams, except I didn't want one of them to win. They didn't. But I tuned in after the first quarter just to see what was going on. And also, I like to look at the ads because, as some of you know, I worked for an ad agency for 11 years. And I like to see they always spend a lot of money on the Super Bowl commercials, and they better be good. Some of them are. But it ended up being such a good game that I watched to the very end, and the ads were okay. But I think my favorite commercial, there was a series of commercials during the Super Bowl, was the Tide ads. It's a Tide ad. Did you catch those? Yeah. They had a bunch of them, and they start out and you think it's just another Super Bowl ad for a luxury car or some kind of drug, pharmaceutical, or some kind of fancy perfume, or Mr. Clean cleaning up or something. And then all of a sudden it becomes a Tide ad, and then you watch the rest of the Super Bowl and you don't know if you're watching a Tide ad or a regular ad until the very end. I thought it was very clever and very funny. And I have to say, thanks to Jim, that you can't see it, but my alb this morning is shining bright and clean because he struggled with it wasn't Tide, it was spelled naphtha. Yes, it works. So I'm glowing under this chasuble. I think we get a Tide ad in our gospel story today. Jesus takes Peter and James and John with him up a high mountain to get away by themselves, get away from everybody. And Mark tells us that this comes right after the feeding of the 4,000, which was a mammoth operation, but a miracle. And but it had to be a very tiring operation. And then after that, you remember Jesus was with his disciples, and he asked them, "Who do people say that I am?" And they had kind of this intense conversation. And Peter blurts out, "You're the Messiah, the Son of God." And Jesus praises Peter, but then he explains what's going to happen to him in the next, days, that he is going to be led to the cross and die. And Peter blurts out, "No way, Jesus, we're not going to let that happen. That's crazy." And Jesus has to rebuke him and tell him, he calls him Satan. So it's a very intense moment. And so you can imagine that Jesus and the disciples are likely exhausted from all this. They're tired, they're dirty, they're smelly. And Jesus calls the three that he's closest with to hike up this mountain with him and get away from everybody alone. And then comes the Tide ad part. Because our expectations are changed. And I'm sure the expectations of the three disciples with Jesus were changed. Suddenly Jesus is transfigured. He is changed, and his clothes became dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them. See, it's a Tide ad. And then, even though the three disciples thought they were getting away for some peace and quiet with their master, here's Elijah and Moses glowing and present with Jesus. They're talking with Jesus, and we don't get any kind of a record of what they might have said, and maybe the disciples didn't hear, but I imagine they were giving Jesus some kind of a pep talk after all he'd been through and what he was about to undergo in the days ahead. I love that Peter babbles about how great it is to be there with these three glowing heroes of the faith. and let's build cottages for each one of you, and we'll just hang out here. But then the writer of the Gospel, Mark, explains he did not know what to say, for they were terrified. He's just blurting out without thinking, let's just stay here. And then it gets even more wild. A cloud of the presence of God overshadows them, and then a voice, "This is my Son, the beloved. Listen to him." In other words, Peter, shut up. Stop trying to figure this out and understand it and capture it and fix everything, and just be quiet in the presence of the beloved Son of God. Listen to him. And remember, Peter had just been arguing with Jesus about no way are you going to go to the cross. No way are you going to die. And Jesus had rebuked him. Once again, Peter speaks without thinking. Talking without thinking. None of us have that problem, right? I don't know. I hear God saying to me all the time, "This is my Son, the beloved. Listen. Listen to him." And then suddenly, there's nothing but an empty mountaintop. Jesus is there with his 3 disciples. Mark doesn't indicate how long they stayed there after the transfiguration on the mountain. They'd come to get away and to rest, but it doesn't sound like they stayed there very long. They did have to come down the mountain, return to real life, like we all do. What a disappointment. And even worse, Jesus told them not to tell anyone about what they had seen until after the Son of Man had risen from the dead. I wonder if they listened to him then. Can you imagine holding that a secret? Well, it's a wonderful story anyway, but I have to confess that the Transfiguration is a little hard to figure out. With all these glowing prophets and Jesus, God's voice booming out of the cloud, it's almost like a Steven Spielberg special effects movie. And as Episcopalians, we kind of pride ourselves on being thoughtful and rational. And this story's a little out there. But more than that, I think I feel a little jealous. The fact that we never get to see the real Jesus in any way. And yet, these disciples got to see him transfigured in his glorious state. And, I've had proverbial mountaintop experiences as you have, and they are wonderful. They're glorious spiritual experiences. But I've never gotten to see Jesus arrayed in all his super Tide clean glory. As Talitha Arnold has put it, I've never seen him change from hot, sweaty, dirty Jesus to cleaner than clean, day-glow Jesus. But I have seen people's lives transfigured. And haven't you? The gawky, seemingly clueless teenager who picks up a musical instrument or finds a scientific field in school that just grabs her and suddenly she becomes a mature adult with a meaningful career that has purpose for so many people. Or the quiet, reserved woman of a certain age who finds herself deeply engaged in a ministry like the food pantry or something and finds her calling, and you can almost see her glow when she undertakes that ministry. Or the grieving widower who somehow finds his life turned right side up through some improbable miracle of a regular old life of tough faith. You've seen people transfigured like that. We've seen Edgar transfigured from a wonderful member here to now someone on his way to ordination. And sometimes he's transfigured, and sometimes he feels the weight of that calling because of all that he has to do in the next while. So please do pray for Edgar. We've all seen people transfigured in that way. And no matter how long those transfigurations last, You've no doubt had times when, right before your very eyes, someone you know is transformed. And you see them again for the first time. You see them in all their glory, just as God sees them. You know, like Peter, we all want to stay in that transfigured moment on top of the mountain. But we have to return to real life at the bottom of the mountain. But Peter learned, and all these folks who are transfigured, I hope, and I hope we all learn, that the one who meets us in glory on the mountaintop is the same one who walks with us every step of the way at the bottom of the mountain, no matter where that journey takes us. So keep that promise in mind as we enter into the season of Lent this week. Remind yourself that that's true, that Jesus is with you every step of the way, whether you're on top of the mountain or down in the valley of real life. Maybe every time you do your laundry, remind yourself of that truth. Amen.